So really excited for today's session with David Goldsmith and David Peterson, and just to introduce them both very briefly, and I'll let them sort of expand. David Goldsmith is an executive coach and one of the founders of, or actually one of the founders of the coaching profession, and the executive director of 7 Paths Forward. David Peterson is actually another executive coach and one of the recipients of the #1 corporate coach in the world awards, co-founder of 7 Paths Forward, and previously led Google's executive coaching and development team. So really excited to be here with both of you and to have a conversation about intentional, mindful coaching. I think it is much needed, so I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tracy. Nice to be with you, and thank you for so graciously welcoming us. Hello, David.
Hi, David. Hi, Tracy. Thank you so much for having us here today. We are really looking forward to this.
So we're going to do a mindfulness minute in just a moment, but let's talk a little bit about the title of our session, because I think there's a lot to unpack just in this title. Being an intentional, mindful coach, one path to greatness. Say a little bit more about what we mean about that, because I know you've been thinking hard on this one.
Well, I'm actually going to start with one of the other stories that you and I chatted about a little while ago. So David and I have been teaching, coaching, helping good coaches become great. So that's part of the thread here about the path to greatness. But for many, many years, I looked at the concept of mindfulness with a slight amount of disdain. And I was very critical of how faddish mindfulness was. And, I thought, this is just a fad. It's going to go away. It's not a big deal. And then one day I found myself in a workshop explaining that to be a great coach, you have to be really intentional and fully present, non-judgmental, and aware of everything that's going on in the coaching engagement. And I thought, that's virtually the definition of mindful. And so I reluctantly realized that I do believe in mindfulness. I think it's an incredibly important concept. But about a year ago, we were presenting on mindfulness, and one of my good friends named Dale said, "Who are you and what have you done with David? He would never talk about mindfulness." So this is a bit of a pivot in some ways, but that sets the stage here that I've become a mindful coach kind of reluctantly.
But did you change how you coached, or did you just discover that you were actually being mindful all along?
I did not change how I coached. I actually just came to terms with the fact that it's a mindful approach. And a couple of the slides in here will show our definition of mindfulness. And I think that might be intriguing for people as well. But that helped reconcile my perspective on that. The mission that we have together at 7 Paths Forward is to help new coaches become good coaches become great, and great coaches become masterful. And so there's a lot of good coaches out there, and we're really, really committed to helping them become better and better and better. And so being intentional and mindful is one of those paths that we're really trying to help people invest in.
I love that. So let's talk a little bit about this notion of what do we mean, what great coaches do, and why great coaching is so important.
So as we've studied this path for how good coaches move to great coaching, to greatness, it's similar to the study of expertise in many fields. You practice, you learn, you move from like, what am I supposed to do to how do I add greater value? And what we've seen is that there are basically 5 ways that great coaches amplify their value significantly more than good coaches do. So great coaches are far more efficient. They start fast. They get to the real work more quickly. They don't waste time with small talk. Great coaches have bigger impact. They go deep. They work on the really meaningful, important stuff that the client needs that makes a bigger difference. And that bigger difference then translates into lasting change. They end strong. They end the coaching conversation strong. They end the coaching engagement strong. So leaders are equipped to go out there and act and endure and be ongoing, continuous learners and continue to improve over time. Great coaches are also much more versatile. They can work with a wider range of clients. They work with difficult, challenging people that good coaches are often intimidated by, and they add systemic value. So they have an impact beyond just the individual that they're working with and the people that they encounter, but thinking about how do I help this leader have impact on the organization, on society, on bigger and bigger systems. So they're thinking much more systemically and taking and providing coaching that generates more systemic value.
So one of the things I think is interesting is that much of what we teach applies to all these things, but I think mindfulness has a particularly interesting edge to that because it requires some presence, managing your attention, really some real thoughtfulness about what you're doing in every layer of the coaching process. And we're going to get into that in just a minute, but why don't we start with a quick mindfulness minute since we're serious about all of that and jump into that a little bit. So let's take a minute. And I'm going to ask you all to shut off any distractions, alerts, or demands for your attention. And then when you're ready, close your eyes, get comfortable. Now, as you get comfortable, consciously let go of anything that you might have your attention on. Just let it drop away just for a minute. And as your attention is fading from anything that requires you to pay attention to it, turn your attention to what do you notice in your room? What smells are there? What sounds are there? Are there any vibrations? Now let your awareness of all those just drop away. And notice if there's anything else drawing your attention. And release that. And now pause for another second and just think about what do you want to pay attention to in this next hour and a half of our time together? What's your intention for your attention? And when you have that set in your mind, take another breath or two, and then when you're ready, open your eyes and join us. So I think this is a good time for us to get into what mindfulness is, what mindlessness is, and kind of think through that while we're starting from a emptier mind and a more intentional mind.
it's hard to go from that to the next slide. So bear with us here. But Ellen Langer has done a lot of research on mindfulness, and in fact, great, compelling research on mindfulness and the difference it makes in the quality of the experience for people. But she starts off a lot of her talks by looking at what is mindlessness and what are we trying to remediate here. So the mindlessness is an inactive state. It's just unconsciously processing without being thoughtful. It's determined by past behaviors and habits and routines that just automatically. And people who are mindless are just looking at things from one single perspective. I don't know if you've had this experience checking into a hotel or something, but it seems to happen to me virtually every time I check in. The desk clerk says to me at some point, "How many keys would you like?" And I say 1 or 2. And the clerk goes through a few more things and comes back and says, "How many keys would you like?" Like, it's just part of their little routine and ritual, but it's mindless. Like, you just asked me that. But they have their checklist, their routine, and they just go through it mindlessly. In contrast, mindfulness is an active state of mind. You're paying attention, you're giving attention to what is new. You're actively noticing what's new, what's different. And in fact, looking at things as if they are new, as if to see them for the first time, being mindfully attentive to what is there. So it requires that you be in the present, sensitive to the context. And what David was doing just a moment ago in the mindfulness minute, like, hear what's there. Pay attention to vibrations and things you might normally ignore. But what's novel, what's different, what's new? And noticing novelty actually reveals, oh, I didn't know that was there, and creates a sense of uncertainty. And when you're observing uncertainty, you're paying attention and you're becoming more mindful. So today we will really focus on 3 key elements underneath this question of what are you paying attention to? And I think there's an interesting, I spent a lot of time thinking about this idea of paying attention. Like, what does it cost us to give our attention to something? And we'll circle back to that in a moment. But 3 elements: practicing awareness, practicing perceiving what is happening in that mindful kind of state, seeing what's there without judgment. Second, we'll talk about how you actually manage your attention, direct it to what matters, guide it to the things that are important for you to pay attention to in the larger context. And then, based on that awareness and what matters, choosing a course of action. So understanding the bigger picture, the trade-offs, the consequences, and making a choice, making a decision about what you will do. David, you want to jump in on this?
Couldn't find my unmute button. You would think I'd know where that is. So the whole notion that attention is not something that we have tons of. It's a very limited resource, and it has a budget, and you can run out of it, and you can not spend it wisely. So we can be paying attention to things that are really not very helpful. So we have to really be very focused on thinking about, where am I putting my attention? Where am I investing my attention? Where am I spending my attention? And we do it fairly automatically, which doesn't mean that we're making the best choices, which means we're just doing what we're accustomed to doing, much like David's story about the hotel clerk with the key question. So we have to really think and choose and really make that decision about what's going on. And I think that's essentially an element that we talked about in the 5 ways that great coaches are mindful, is making those real choices and preferences about where they put their attention, because there's lots of things in a coaching session you can pay attention to. So you have to be choiceful.
So here's a framework that will explore a couple components of this. But this is the framework that I think really helps people figure out, where do I pay my attention? What do I direct myself toward? And so 4 different dimensions that you have to train yourself to see, to perceive, looking deeper inside yourself. So looking inward, what matters, what's important to you, what matters to other people. Second, looking at the bigger systems, looking outward to, from your own core to your family, your community, your organization, your team, your society, your country. So expanding your perspective to see and appreciate things across bigger and bigger systems. And then seeing farther across time, looking backward, looking forward. It's interesting on this dimension to listen to how people talk about the pandemic. I have a friend who early in the pandemic said, nothing like this has ever happened before. But if you have a view of the longer time frame, you know that there was a pandemic in the in the 19-teens, like 100 years ago, that where millions and millions of people died. You actually realized Ebola and SARS and all these other pandemics have occurred. And you go back farther and farther to the bubonic plague, and it puts things into perspective. When it's like, oh yes, this happens on a regular basis. This is not unusual. Yes, it's unusual in the last 5 or 10 years, but it's not unusual in the history. So that ability to see farther across time and to reflect on your own life. Where was I 5 years ago? Where do I want to be 10 years from now? And then finally, training yourself to see diverse perspectives, being able to look at things from other lenses, from other points of view. So you expand your horizons on all of these. And essentially, that's one of the keys to maturity, to wisdom, making better decisions, better judgment, better insight into what's really happening. So that ability to see patterns across time and space, bigger picture, bigger systems, the space thing, and time, longer time horizons, and diverse perspectives, and to actually see the context and the connections between all of these. That ability to step back and step back and step back and see the bigger picture helps you make better decisions and be more mature and thoughtful in your judgments.
Hey, David, we have a question from Ray Carr. He's curious about, how is our use of mindfulness the same or different from the late Doug Silsby's presence-based coaching?
Hey, Ray, nice to have you here. Thanks for joining us. I read Silsby's stuff a while ago. I'm not that familiar, but we have, to a certain extent, come up with our own, specific definition of this. And I'm not trying to be too hard to be precise, but I would say I follow very much Ellen Langer's approach to mindfulness, and I can't speak to Doug's offhand. David, do you know?
I don't.
Great question, Ray. Thank you, but sorry, I can't give you a better answer. So, a reflection question for you. How intentional are you about managing your attention? What will help you expand your perspectives to see and appreciate more? So thinking about longer time frames, bigger systems, different perspectives. Yeah, a little background noise.
And take a minute and if you care to put some of those reflections in the chat, and let's take a pause here. We're going to deliberately slow down and stop and pause, and we want people to really take a minute to absorb and pick up things from each section and make a note of them. And then we'll move on to the next section. So feel free to put those in chat.
Most of us go through our days with a good amount of time on autopilot. And I find myself doing that quite a bit. As I mentioned, I feel like I've become a very intentional, mindful coach. So when I'm in that mode, when I'm actively coaching, I feel like I'm pretty consistently present and reflective and non-judgmental. But in my daily routine, my regular life, I often have to catch myself and say, okay, be present, be aware, pay attention. What's going on now? It's a never-ending discipline.
I have a question about that, David, because I've been thinking about this. Do we put our coaching uniform on and that triggers our brain to be non-judgmental and all the attributes you just described a minute ago? Or did we train ourselves that when we're in a coaching session, we're going to be a certain way? And if so, why didn't we train ourselves to be that way in the rest of our life?
I feel like I've absolutely trained myself and cultivated that skill and that discipline in coaching. And I think it's because it's the context. There's a clear task. Being mindful clearly helps that. It's something I'm committed to. So I invested in my own development to help make that happen. And the rest of life is so diverse and scattered, it's hard to say, okay, now this is one of those moments or contexts where I really need to be more disciplined in my mindfulness.
Yeah, but I wonder, are we as disciplined in our relationship with our significant other as we are in terms of being mindfulness and present as we are with our coaching clients?
Good questions to ponder.
Exactly. So we have a couple other reflections here. Tracy says, your point about attention being a limited resource really struck home with me. I feel like I can focus my attention where I want it to be in the moment, but when I'm doing things on autopilot, I'm in my head. Am I then exhausting my attention resource and limited its availability at the time I need it? Yes, I think you are. And another often time losing track. Your advice, look inwards and outwards simultaneously, should help for sure. And Manish, one, he's not very consistent in how intentional he is about managing attention. And two, what will help me is searching, inviting questions, incentive to expand my perspective. Nice.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
So let's talk a little bit more about reflection.
What an idea. So this is probably one of the easiest ways to begin cultivating a habit of reflection, cultivating greater mindfulness. And it started years and years ago when in coaching, I would ask my clients, go try these things and then reflect on what worked. And there was often an automatic reaction like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to reflect. And it comes with this notion of journaling or writing things down or really investing time. I said, how about 1 minute a day? Just think about, what did you do today? What did you learn? What do you want to do differently tomorrow? So you look back one day, what happened in the past day, what worked, where could I have done better, where could I have been more intentional, and one day into the future. What will I do tomorrow to continue to grow, to put myself into a situation that stretches my learning edge? And similarly, step back a little bit, look at a broader time horizon, weekly, just a couple minutes a week. Whenever you plan your week, Sunday evening, Monday morning on your way into to work or going to your desk, where are my opportunities this week to try new things, to grow, to do new things? Where could I have done something differently last week? And so you expand that perspective a little bit more. You take a bigger time horizon. Similarly, every month, every quarter, every year, So you start to see the pattern here: daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. You step back, you take a little bit more time. It's still just 5 to 10 minutes, but you look at a longer term time horizon. So monthly, what kind of progress am I making on my development? What can I do in the next month that would really help me stay on track? Quarterly, and because a lot of people plan their goals quarterly, I encourage folks to quarterly say, am I working on the right things? Am I working on my development goals that will actually help me be more effective in accomplishing the quarterly objectives that I have? And then annually, you step back even farther and say, am I on the right path? Is my development, is where I'm investing my time and energy consistent with my mission and values? Oh, by the way, every year, let me recheck my mission and values. Have they changed? Is this still who I want to be? Is this still taking me down the road of who I want to become? Now it's tricky. What comes after annually? So for years, I just had decadally and quinquennially every 5 to 10 years. But about 5 years ago, I noticed that so many people and industries and careers were being disrupted. And it seemed like if you hadn't been disrupted in 3 years, you might be vulnerable. So I encourage people every 3 years to stop and ask, where am I vulnerable to disruption? Where do I need to pivot? So taking charge of your life, reinvigorating it, renewing, pivoting, making a move every few years. So it doesn't have to literally be every 3 years, but it's a good time to check in. And again, reflecting on that broader time frame. What's likely to disrupt me in the future? Where am I becoming increasingly vulnerable to somebody else's move? And then longer time frames, every 5 or 10 years. And I love the word decadally, by the way. It's just kind of fun, and it's a rarely used word, but I probably use it more than anybody else. But this is where take time to think about your life purpose and identity. And this says 30 minutes. And it doesn't seem like every 5 to 10 years, 30 minutes is enough. But if you're actively reflecting daily and weekly and monthly and connecting to the broader purpose and mission, you've got that habit. And you've cultivated the ability to see over longer periods of time. So you actually can make a lot of progress by intentionally stepping back, even for 30 minutes every 5 or 10 years, and asking, am I on the right course? Am I making progress on the things that matter? Am I becoming the kind of human being that I want to be? Am I becoming the kind of coach that I want to be? And where do I need to take a different path? And then periodically, this is something that I think just for me, it's the questions that I want to make sure I continue to ask myself. And for a long time, I would just periodically ask myself, what have I done lately to become a better person? It's not that daily, what am I doing? But it's more metaphysical. It's more directly connected to the 10-year questions. I want to become a better person. What does that mean? What does that look like in my life today? So across time and space, cultivating these kinds of questions so you develop a habit of reflection.
I know you're talking specifically about reflection, and we could plug in different words than development progress for monthly, quarter, and annually. And many people reflect on how am I doing on my goals, or how am I doing on the size of my coaching practice. But I think it's interesting, and I know you intentionally chose the word development, because if you really want to be a great coach, there has to be an intentional development path. And you have to really be thinking about that. And so many coaches are not intentionally developing themselves. They're accidentally developing themselves. They run into development along the way, but they're not intentionally doing it. And we've talked a lot about the virtuoso violinist who might intentionally say, I'm going to work on this one measure of this one piece for a month, because it's so critical for my ability to express this piece of music effectively. And I think that sense of development and reflecting, where am I in my path to being a great coach, as a reflection, is a practice that just simply adding that question into your routine, into your reflections, will help you get on that path even further.
Another place to reflect is on one's assumptions and mental models. So this goes to the heart of the disruption question. Where are my mental models no longer as good as they used to be? In a world of constant change, what assumptions am I making that I need to test and reassess? What has changed around me that might make my current point of view, my current assumptions, my current mental models out of date or less accurate than they should be? So those kinds of questions, I think as well, can be really useful. Since we've been talking about reflection, how about a reflection on reflection?
We have a few already. Ray says, webinars like this with experts I respect and admire help me set intentions, attend to reflecting on what I'm learning. And Ray did point out he's learning new words on number decadally and triennially. Quinquennially, yeah. There's Joanne, I've paid attention to seeing wait staff helpers, giving thanks to them and not just responding with a script. Novantu, being embodied always helps me. The body is an ever-present teacher and truth teller. That's a great reflection as well. What am I feeling? What's going on in my body that I'm unaware of?
Yeah, part of looking inward and that mindfulness is sensing on multiple dimensions. What am I feeling? What am I experiencing? How am I reacting? Physically, what am I feeling? Emotionally, what am I feeling?
And I think what's interesting about it is that you start paying attention to that, again, using that limited resource, and you start paying attention to that in that same category of what gets measured, gets improved. Just the simple act of paying attention, noticing that, brings your attention even more subconsciously to that later on. So you're more able to pay attention to it. So we have that ability to steer and direct that attention in a really effective way.
So if you look at these questions, I mean, it's not so much in the first question, but it follows what we pointed out earlier, like being aware of what's happening, managing your attention, and then choosing what to do with that. So that sequence of sensing what's there just objectively, then figuring out what matters in this. How does it connect to what I really care about? And what do I want to do with that? So we're assuming there's a willingness to do something here, like cultivating a discipline of reflection. You may or may not want that, but what do you want to do with reflection? And where will you begin to make that change? What is the action you will put into place?
We're having a couple more reflections. I'm journaling daily, including dream capture, and how I phrase my thoughts and dreams provides insights for me. And I find it when I read what I've written. Ray says, reflection is the #1 tool for helping me get through this pandemic. And Tracy says, I try and reflect daily, particularly after meditation, but feel I can be more intentional about my reflective practice.
Nice, thank you. So thinking about our reflection, where we're paying attention, how we manage our time, how we manage our attention, and to be intentional about constructing the world that we want, constructing the future that we want. What are our dreams? How are we making sure that our choices move us forward in achieving the things that matter most to us? Love this quote.
Mm. And this again is this notion of where are you investing? Because investing attention is an element of constructing.
So we're going to take a deep dive into a little explored area of managing your attention. And it starts with this question: with all the distractions in the world today, how can we actually be mindful and manage our attention with so many things calling our attention, trying to distract us, trying to overwhelm us? How do we become more mindful and manage our attention? There's a simple answer and a more complex answer. So simple answer is we just have to practice. Practice paying attention, practice being mindful, practice directing our attention. The more complex answer, and the one that's far more intriguing to us at least, is how do we get better at multitasking? If we are getting attacked by multiple dimensions, calling on us, demanding our attention, how can we manage that? How can we be more effective in managing all the things going on around us, managing our time and attention? And we believe that multitasking is an essential piece of thriving in a very complex, demanding world. So this is where we'd love to get your comments on chat as well as we go, just the nature of multitasking and your questions.
And here we're going to definitely go against the conventional wisdom, because you frequently read that multitasking makes you stupid. And we're saying you must multitask in order to survive. So are we saying you must multitask in order to survive and you'll be stupid? Or are we saying that it'll actually takes us in a different direction?
I think multitasking makes you smarter. But so this image, and there are, if you search for an image on multitasking, you'll get all these goofy things about taking care of the baby, exercising, being on a cell phone, drinking, cooking, all of that, working, all at the same time. That's not what we're talking about here. So let's take a look at what it is really. And there are so many people who say you can't multitask or it makes you stupid. But let's just look at the fact that, there are certain things that you can't multitask. We agree on that. So some things truly are incongruent, like physically impossible, at least in current reality, to drive a car and to go swimming. Although you see in the picture here, somebody tried it. Let's go swimming while driving the car. Things that are cognitively demanding, that both activities demand a lot of your attention and cognitive processing power, like taking an intelligence test and filling out your taxes. Really difficult to do both at the same time, or maybe impossible. Similarly, things that are physically or sensorially demanding, like visually, your senses, proofreading a manuscript and monitoring air traffic. I think that should say air traffic control. Can't imagine how people would do that. Looking back and forth and trying to make good decisions on that. And then of course, you can't multitask on things that you can't task to begin with. If you're not good at it, if you're not good at two things, you can't do them together effectively either. So clearly some stuff doesn't work. One of the interesting things that we've pointed out before, I've often talked about how flawed some of the research is on multitasking. And here's just one example of why I don't pay attention to some of the research on multitasking. So much, I said some here, I don't know the exact amount, but some research on multitasking is conducted on participants who've been asked to concurrently perform two new and cognitively demanding tasks. So here's this puzzle and here's this puzzle, now do both. And of course, it's inefficient. Of course, like I'm trying to figure this out. Oh yeah, I have to figure this out. So you're both learning something new and trying to perform well. Even on one thing that would be demanding. But of course it's inefficient if you're trying to learn two things that are demanding at the same time. So people say, well, performance declines. Yes, but this is a situation where we know multitasking is not appropriate. So if you do research on things that we know are hard to do concurrently and you can't do them, I don't know what that actually establishes. So that was one end of the spectrum. Here's another end of the spectrum. And if you see on the slides, it went from this side to this side. On the other hand, we already multitask and task switch constantly. So there are compatible behaviors like talking and eating, conversing with friends at mealtime. And this, of course, the asterisk, we can talk and eat at the same time. It may not be polite to talk with your mouth full, but people do it all the time. We're talking, we're engaging. There are multiple things that we could be doing at the same time. We also do things that are routinized or habitual or well practiced. So we drive a car. Most of us have been driving for years, and it becomes automatic and natural. And we can drive the car without stopping to think, oh, where's the brake? And how hard should I push the brake pedal? Those are the questions that you had to ask when you were brand new and learning it for the first time. New car drivers can't multitask well. They're struggling just to manage the whole operation of the car. But once you're used to it, you can drive, you can converse, you can sing, you can listen to music, you recall lyrics, have an interesting conversation about the song easily at the same time. And then one of the multitasking situations that gets caricatured a lot, teenage kids on the phone, watching TV, doing their homework. In conditions where the time pressure or demands for your attention, demands for quality, demands for precision are low, I can watch TV and not be tested on, did I remember every character's name and every nuance of the show? So I'm just doing it for enjoyment. If I miss something, big deal. Texting with friends, writing my to-do list, and playing fetch with my dog. When I was working on this particular slide, I was actually doing all of these things more or less at the same time. Not necessarily, well, but I'm playing fetch when it's like, okay, dog brings me a ball, like, there you go get it. All of these things, without a high demand for perfection, we can multitask.
David, I think multitasking and task switching are different because task switch connotes start, stop, and different things. But singing while driving in the car or listening to the radio, those are simultaneous. So I think that makes sense. But Silvana has a great example. She's talking about simultaneous interpretation. You must focus on listening to language A, decoding language A, remembering the idea for a few seconds, translating into language B, uttering the idea in language 2, and not listening to yourself. All this in just under a few seconds. So this has got high levels of concentration and multitasking.
Beautiful example. I was just doing a presentation a while ago for a group in Taiwan, and I was just amazed at the interpreter and how I couldn't tell what he was saying, but the response from the audience and then the questions that came back. It is amazing, and it is multitasking. You're doing so many different things in a very short span of time. Thanks for that example. Now, the challenge here is to be sufficiently self-aware and alert when the dynamics shift. If you're watching TV and playing fetch with the dog, and then the fire alarm goes off, an obvious example, you have to stop doing all of those things and shift your attention to finding out the source of the fire alarm. So there are some signals that say time to switch, but let's say your spouse walks into the room and goes, is that a signal that says stop doing all those other things and shift your attention to this one really important thing? Or do you just kind of tune that out? You really have to be able to manage your attention and pick up the signals that say, this is important. This is a different thing that I need to pay attention to. And so consciously managing and making choices about where and how you focus your attention is the essential, I love this little phrase, the essential multitasking meta skill. You have to have a meta reflection that's above all of this, monitoring where am I paying attention and what else do I need to pay attention to. Now, for those of you who are multitasking or distracted, let's say that again. Consciously managing where and how you focus your attention is the essential multitasking meta skill. And again, please add chats, questions in the chat if you have anything.
Yeah, we have a question. Where have you found this awareness around multitasking most useful in your coaching practice or in enabling coaches to grow?
This is actually where our strong focus on multitasking came from. So in coaching, the most effective coaches are able to be in the moment, actively coaching and reflecting on, where are we going? What does this mean? What do I want to file away and come back for later? What are the patterns that I'm seeing? How does this connect to the longer term goals? So helping coaches cultivate a sense of meta reflection and meta awareness, it's absolutely essential. Practicing coaching skills. So we teach a lot of coaching, and we teach people to coach in triads, and their ability to manage the coaching conversations, like play a realistic client, be intentional about the level of challenge that they're creating, and then help the coach learn, by giving feedback and coaching them and having a conversation, operating on multiple dimensions. So those are great examples of where it's critical for coaches to develop the ability to multitask.
Another question, Nubantu asks, thanks for clarifying the issue around multitasking. I find that with practicing mindfulness, parents' attention, it is difficult for me to do different tasks simultaneously. How can you do different tasks effectively?
Thank you for teeing up the next set of slides. So that answers the question, how do you learn to do this? But it starts with what we've been talking about, like, is it even feasible to do these two tasks together? So you have to be intentional about where you try to do that. But as we transition to that, and there are some tips coming up on how to learn this, consciously managing your attention fits what we started off with, this three-part framework. So being aware, fully present, observing what's actually happening in the moment, so you see and perceive what's happening. You discern what matters, so you know what matters for you, you know what matters to others, and then making the tough choices. So I choose to be mindless in the moment. It's a little bit of a paradox, but making the tough choices about what to do. I don't want to spend my time being distracted. I want to be fully engaged in this moment and just enjoy it. That's a choice that you can make. Now, I went to this multitasking class and all I got was this stupid t-shirt. Full-time multitasking ninja is not an actual job title. So one thing you can do to systematically practice and develop your multitasking skills is find something that you're actually already really good at, and then adding something else that you want to get better at. And I have a friend who's a chef, and I noticed this one time. Three of us were actually going to cook a meal for him. So Alex is a Michelin star chef. He always cooks for us. We were going to cook for him. So three of us, we each went out and we bought the ingredients for a dish. We got there to Pat's house and we're all trying to put this together and make everything. And we're running around like, where's this pan? And Alex is just kind of watching and he's talking to us. And suddenly he grabs a pan and he picks up an ingredient and he starts cooking. All the while, he's helping us think about what we're trying to do. But unintentionally, he just started cooking. So he's carrying on a conversation. He's teaching us and he's cooking a meal out of ingredients that, he just looks around and he sees them. He sees the pattern. So it's really easy for Alex to multitask. You can see this on TV. Master chefs teaching cooking skills and spontaneously preparing a complicated meal that will be judged by others there. So as you get good and you can combine these different elements, so being intentional about starting with something good, gradually adding new things that you want to learn and get better at. So at some point now, you're multitasking on two things that you're good at. Second, being intentional about how much attention I will guide towards one task or the other. So I hate to say this because people will then call me on it, but I am often sitting in a meeting and working on some routine little thing, like deleting emails that I don't want to read. Like if I can tell from the heading, no, no, no. I don't read the ones that that I think are important. If I can't make an immediate decision, I don't go in and try to make sense of this and see. But there are some things just from the title, it doesn't take much brain power at all. And where the investment is low in cognitive processing power, multitask. This increases efficiency.
It's interesting. I think there's an element to it where there's been some research, and I can't remember where, working on a 10% task like you're talking to actually helps the other 90% be more effective. It's almost like there's unused energy that's flopping around, and by focusing it on something that doesn't require a big cognitive load, that 90% works better.
I think that might be from the monotasking is a myth article. That human brains are not meant to monotask. We have a hard time focusing. And so something that's a little bit distracting and trying to do two things keeps us more engaged in some circumstances. So we can go back and take a look at that. And then, especially as we were talking about before, coaching and other skills, having that ability to reflect and self-monitor and self-manage, making meta level choices. So when you are doing something, complex interactions with humans, cultivating that ability to step back and see what's happening in the moment and to make better choices about it. So these are the ideal kinds of circumstances for productive multitasking. So again, we believe that smart multitasking, managing your attention and focus, truly differentiates success in a world that is complex, changing, and demanding of your attention. Tying this back to where we started, what are you paying attention to at 3 different levels? Being aware, objectively, without judgment, managing your attention, and then choosing action based on what you see, what you value, and what kind of difference you want to make in the world. So, what are you taking away from this? Please add some comments or thoughts in chat.
So Ray's testing out your theory. He's in this webinar, he's deleting email at the same time. And he noticed if he starts to read an email, he loses track of what you're saying.
Exactly. So Ray, practicing the ability to not read more than do a superficial job of reading the title.
Exactly. And you can tune up your ability to, I can do this level of thing. My wife, when she's watching the Great British Baking Show, does not do anything else because she wants it to have all her focus, because she wants to take in the visual part as well as the auditory. If she's listening to the news, she's doing 1 or 2 other things, and it's all fine. So we can gauge up and down how we want to use those intentional resources. Ray asked a question. I was learning to be a political activist in the 60s. It was often said the reflection without consequent action was a waste of time. What do you think about the need for action as a result of reflection?
I think the goal of life is action. So to me, and this was part of my initial rejection of mindfulness. Mindfulness for the sake of mindfulness has no value to me. Now, I know there are people who place an inherent value on mindfulness, especially on mindful meditation. But for me, figuring out what matters and what am I going to do with it, the ultimate goal is action that leads to a better world, a better state of being, achieving important goals. So what matters and what do I want to do about it are integrally related.
Tracy shares this story. She used to work as an agent, or at least back when we did things by telephone and not email. And she had to be able to focus on the person she was speaking with and listen to all the other agents around her and tune in and out of multiple conversations. And that's another attentional game you can play. Back when we used to go to restaurants, you could sit at a table and tune in on different conversations, or have all the conversations become a blur and pay attention to none of them. So we have this ability to steer our attention and practice it and be mindful about where we're putting it.
Love it.
Joanne says, I find I benefit from taking notes during this webinar to give my hands something to do. I used to provide engineers in meetings with little games and toys so they could use their hands as they attended to the meeting.
One piece of research that we didn't reference yet is fascinating. Is taking notes during a presentation multitasking, or is it one task? There was one study that looked at how people defined multitasking in that very situation. The people who thought taking notes and paying attention were different tasks tended to take better notes than the people who thought being in a seminar taking notes is just one task. So that, like, I'm to actively manage, I have to listen to this, and then simultaneously I have to translate it into notes. That level of engagement produced higher quality notes. Really interesting little study.
That's interesting. I wonder if this relates to Navantu's question. How possible is it to multitask two different things that hold meaning for you and there's a sense of urgency?
The more urgency, the more the demand for high levels of quality, the more difficult it is to multitask.
So, can you do it two?
Can you do two?
Yeah, if they're two simultaneously urgent.
If they're both well rehearsed, and if you're skillful and you're unconsciously competent, probably.
I think the simultaneous translation example is a good one. It's that because there's an unconscious competence in that where you are hearing it and automatically doing the translating in your head and speaking out the words. It's a process that flows through you as opposed to, what do I do next? What do I do next? What do I do next?
So thank you all. We'll stick around here, take some more questions, continue the conversation if you like. Just want to let you know that we're doing a free masterclass if you're interested in more.
We've got some nice tools to accelerate your coaching impact, and we shared a number of things that are not in that masterclass today. So you'll have a lot of advantage to learn some other things. Nubantu says, thanks, I'm blown away. So any questions you have, please post them in chat. We'd be happy to take them from you. Any other reflections or comments? Ray says, great webinar. Thanks for the detailed information and ideas. Manish, thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
It's been a pleasure. Go ahead, Tracy.
So sorry. Sorry about that. I just wanted to say how absolutely wonderful this has been. And I would love, if it's possible for you, I appreciate you sharing this on the screen. I'll also send you an email. And if, with your permission, if I can post about this masterclass on our LinkedIn page for reference as well.
Sure,
that would be
great.
Did you record this?
Yes, it has been recorded also. So, and I'm definitely going to be going back and watching it again.
Yeah, we'll share the slides with you.
Awesome. I had something come to mind. I wanted to just ask you or share this with you briefly, easier than typing it up. When you were talking about that 90-10 exercise, I thought about how in meditation, almost that practice of saying a mantra would almost be that exercise in a sense, right? Because you're just engaging a tiny bit of your brain on the mantra and anchoring there. So I wonder if that's sort of similarly applied to what you talked about with you know, kind of just doing something fairly unconscious, like deleting emails during a meeting.
It very well could be. It's training yourself to not be distracted by having a very simple place to focus your attention. And I think it's easier to focus on a mantra than it is on nothingness.
For sure. I think there might be a few more questions or comments in the chat.
Some nice comments. Yeah, some appreciation for debunking the myth on multitasking. People like the chill vibe from the presentation. Any other questions we missed, Tracy?
No, I think we've covered everything. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so very much. So if you could, Ray is saying he also likes how you demonstrated not being distracted by keeping a focus on the ideas while at the same time responding to questions and comments. Good demo of multitasking. So, yeah, so this session is being recorded and an email will go out to everyone within a week, generally, with the recordings. I'm going to right now post in the chat about the LinkedIn group. And then if you, anything that you would like me to share within that group, I will happily do so. So I'll send you both a separate email about that.
Thank you, Tracy. And if anybody has questions for us beyond that, you can reach us through 7pathsforward.com, and we'd be happy to answer your questions and chat with you offline.
Wonderful. Thank you both again for an amazing presentation, and everyone that joined us here at Awake, Aware, Arise. There are a few more programs happening through the week, so please do check the schedule out, and appreciate us meeting here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks, everybody.
Nice to spend time with you all.
Yeah, thank you for paying attention. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.